why don't we do this quick, and maybe this can be a good opportunity, my last part, to open up the discussion since I got here. Actually, since I got the position as fiscal economist of the Brazilian team, I've been only talking about politics, or hearing politics. I've been talking economics, but I've been hearing politics, and I've been reading politics like every day in the news. When I wake up and I go to the news, everything that has to do with the fiscal crisis, the situation of the debt path, pension reform, everything has to do with politics. Actually, we've been modifying, not the IMF. Actually, the IMF has been very kind of robust in terms of trying to analyze, as we've shown, the underlying data. But we've witnessed when we've visited Brazil and when we've been reading what forecasters have been doing. Forecasts have been always very sensitive to what has been happening in the political situation. So we decided, why don't we give it a try and see? There are many aspects, or many actually points of view that you can take into account to look at, the discussion of politics. Is it the electoral cycle? Is it the constitutional constraints? So we decided just to focus on one dimension, which is that's political fragmentation of the Brazilian system, which is very unique actually in terms of the world. It is called some sort of a coalition system in itself, because it was designed like that after the dictatorship, to actually bring voice. So in this debate about always this tension between democracy and efficiency, to give more weight to democracy, even if it was at the cost of some sort of efficiency. And it is a very large country, it is a continent in itself, so with many people, many sensitivities. So in the extreme is Brazilian characteristics in terms of political fragmentation behind part of what we've seen of fiscal indiscipline in the last part, or in any case of fiscal problems in terms of addressing fiscal reforms. The truth is that if we just borrowing from the pension discussion, which actually you see the government, past government, they announced, well, we will announce a pension reform soon. And then they keep postponing because it is politically difficult after the municipal elections. Then after the spending cap is approved. Then maybe before Christmas when everybody's celebrating, but nobody pays attention. Don't know. I mean, it's difficult, and it has been. But what I want to say is that it is not only in Brazil. Actually, I think Brazilians are very open in terms of the discussion right now. They know that they have to address the thing, and it's on the news. In some of the countries, it only came, this discussion, when the crisis actually hit. So it's been difficult. International experience shows that pension and other expenditure reforms, the wage bill, typically are politically very difficult. Sometimes it's only the election cycle. Sometimes it's political fragmentation. There are groups that defend their acquired rights, or there are groups that actually push for more spending, whatever the direction. Is the situation of Brazil different than in other countries? So that's a bit what we wanted to look at. And there are two ways to look at this. There are different sets of indicators. In the political economy literature, we can group these indicators into two big groups. Some of them related to common pool theory, which basically would say that the larger the number of parties and the stronger the political polarization, the larger the pressures, or the stronger the pressures for spending more, larger the deficit, larger the debt increases. And here we just compare data from the database of political institutions of the World Bank. For Brazil and the rest of the world. The rest of the world here, it is a sample average of 90 countries, including advanced, emerging, and developing countries. All the countries that we found data in the database. And you see in red the rest of the world, and in blue Brazil. And clearly in the first column, political fragmentation is high. It's almost twice in Brazil as the rest of the world. This means that the number of parties is very high. Actually, if you look at the number of parties registered in Brazil, it's 35, I believe. Still 40 of them waiting for authorization to be authorized. So there's
We have lots of opinions.
Exactly.
70 parties.
And then 28 of them get representation in the chambers. If you compare that with Germany, Germany has 9. The US has 2. In chamber, they actually create a lot of mess as well, but it's also because of the political polarization. So there are different dimensions. So the number of parties is not definitive, but it's a big indicator. You compare, I don't know, Chile 9, Mexico 9. So except for Argentina, who has 37, Brazil is probably okay. Very big.
We're like-minded countries.
Yeah.
Mercosur, we can do the things together.
So then the margin of majority. So you need a coalition to form a majority. So therefore, the margin of majorities is always below. Although Brazil has demonstrated that despite of the number of parties, they managed to form coalitions because actually 5 or 6 players actually dictate what is happening. Okay, so this is why you see that the margin of majorities in terms of the number of seats that the majority would control in the parliament is a little bit smaller than in the rest of the world, but it's not that bad with respect to the world average. Political polarization in the case is very strong. This has to do with the ideology. The way they construct this is looking at party manifestos, the platforms on which they run on elections, and the type of positions that they defend. And well, this is a complicated index, but in any case, it gives a clear picture. So a lot of polarization in Brazil with respect to the world average. And then a discussion that was actually in the transition from Rousseff administration to Temer administration, when, okay, the number of ministers or the number of ministries with spending capacities is very high. We should lower it down. Well, actually, Brazil actually has a higher average number of ministers, but it's not that bad with respect to the rest of the world, around 36, 37. Some countries in Europe also have this problem, typically also proportional and coalition systems. Italy is a case that is always mentioned, but Brazil is not alone, and it's not very different from other countries. So these are indicators. I could bring more. I just show you the ones that actually push in favor of spending, in favor of deficit, and create difficulties for the debt path. There's another way of looking at this, which is, okay, so once a government or a country, and the government representing the country is willing to do reform, then there are actually veto players, groups that actually oppose those reforms and spending cuts, okay? If you know the political economy literature, there's a veto players indicator produced by George Tsvetel's and actually has been compiled by this database of the World Bank on a systematic basis. Basically, it looks at the number of players that can oppose. So it looks at the number of chambers, the distribution of powers, and how can you oppose these expenditure reforms. If you have to pass through many committees, the capacity to block any reform. So the number of veto players in Brazil is also higher with respect to the world average. And then there are some other indicators that we actually kind of put together, which is, well, you would think that people that are getting pensions would oppose pension reforms, or people that are under unemployment subsidies would oppose cuts in unemployment subsidies. So what we see there is the change in the old age dependency ratio in the last 5 years, and the change in the unemployment rate in the last 5 years, as a way to capture the number of people that would be actually potentially opposing those reforms. And you see that those changes, because Brazil is, has an aging problem, as Isabella discussed, and also unemployment problem in the last 5 years. Well, you see that potentially those groups are larger or have grown faster in the last 5 years in Brazil than in the rest of the world. And also social unrest, measured by the number of strikes per day, is very high in Brazil with respect to other countries. This is using the ILO indicators of strikes. So, well, this would not be important if all these indicators were not related. I actually assume at the beginning that these indicators are related to deficits and debt. Let's show if this is the case, because if not, it would be just characteristics of the political system, and it would have any impact on fiscal results. The truth is that what we did is look at these 90 countries every 4 years. So every time there are elections, so the parliament stays like that in Brazil and in other countries. So during this legislative period of 4 years, we look at the change in debt to GDP ratio. And what you can see is that, well, the parliamentary majorities and small cabinets are associated with better debt results in terms of changes in debt that are smaller than otherwise, okay, than if you have, a parliamentary minority or a big cabinet. So also you see that high number of veto players with respect to, the median value are also associated. We only have data here for advanced economies to make the comparison with stronger or larger changes in debt over the legislative tenure. No, same thing with days of strikes. Higher number of days of strikes is actually correlated with the change in the debt to GDP ratio. These are only stylized facts. Okay, just simple plotting of the numbers. When we run regressions, I'm not putting all the control variables here. In any case, running regressions on this, 92 countries shows that, all the indicators that we're mentioning as potentially dangerous for accumulation of public debt are actually positively associated with changes in debt. So more proportional political systems with larger number of parties or smaller, tinier majorities, lack of control of the parliament, high polarization, high number of ministers are all associated with increases in debt. Same thing with veto players, larger number of veto players, larger changes in, in potential indicators of social unrest like days of strike, changing unemployment rates, or the pressures to defend the acquired rights like changes in the old age dependency ratio are all associated with the accumulation of debt, which is what we suspected, but we're just giving numbers here showing that. Let me conclude here and then so that we can open up the discussion. The truth is that political fragmentation is an important factor explaining changes in public debt, not only in Brazil, but in all countries of the world, of these 92 countries. Brazil is above the average in all these indicators, as we showed at the beginning. Political fragmentation is high and the strength of veto players is increasing. So probably part of what we've seen in terms of debt accumulation in Brazil is actually related to political problems, not to other economic problems. So this is why we looked at it. It is true that then when we take this into account and we actually look at what the government is doing, you see that the fiscal adjustment strategy probably is an attempt, like passing the spending cap bill, approving an independent fiscal institution that has just, been discussed in the Senate. It's an attempt by the authorities to contain these pressures, fragmentation and the difficulties to, to pass reforms in order to impose a hard budget constraint. The truth is that maybe this has been discussed, and when we visited the country, we've heard that from economic and political actors, maybe political reforms in Brazil should be part of the discussion and may have a positive effect on fiscal discipline, including clausula barrera, which is basically the amount of, percentage of votes that you need to get representation, and also funding. This has been done in other countries as well. We actually see that in Italy. Renzi is now, the prime minister putting for a vote constitutional reform with this same inspiration. Next time they will see what happens. So Brazil is not alone there. And these things should be probably part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.